Welcome to the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. I am your host, Chad Hufford, and this is the podcast where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the working world. Each week, we dive into the incredible stories of honest, hardworking folks who have found financial success through grit, determination, and good old-fashioned elbow grease. So if you're ready to be inspired and learn how to turn your hard work into your own success story, you're in the right place. This is the Blue Collar Millionaire Show.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. This is a little bit of a different break from what we've been doing. Of course, we've been going through the book, and now that we finished going through Forging Financial Freedom, wanted to take some time and talk through this idea that you've talked about, Chad, in some of your seminars, the workshops that we've done, the importance of having faith in the future. And one of this question that you've asked the audience when you're doing a workshop like that is, what would be, if you could pick any time in history to be alive, what would be the era that you would pick?
Okay. While our audience is thinking about that, or our listeners are thinking about that, first I want to just set for why this is important.
Yeah.
Because people are like, well, faith in the future, and it's really easy to get sucked up in everything that's going wrong in the world, right? Like you pick up your phone in the morning and you can see in just a few moments everything that went bad all across the world while you were sleeping in the last 8 hours. So why is faith in the future important? Well, the whole point of investing is paying the future version of you, future version of your family. Maybe it's leaving a legacy. Like if you don't believe there's something better on the other side of this, what's the point of putting a plan together? What's the point of putting money in your 401k? So we often hear pushback against, well, if I don't invest in this because the world's going to hell in a handbasket, or, what's going to happen next time the stock market's going to crash? Like, we don't know. The world could end. But if there's no financial plan for Armageddon.
Right.
And even if it's not full on Armageddon, like if you aren't willing to believe that there's a better future for you, then there's really no point in saving investing. Max out your credit card, eat, drink, and be merry. Tomorrow we may die. That is not advice. I'm just saying, like, if that's what you believe, live it up in the moment. It's kind of the metaphor I've used before is, it's kind of like somebody getting up early to work out or something like that. And if you don't believe, if you're 100 pounds overweight, or your blood pressure is 220 over 130, or your resting blood sugar is up in the 150, like if you don't believe that those things can change, if you don't believe there's a healthier version of you on the other side of that treadmill or with that long-term diet, then what's the point? So for anything in life, I think you have to have some faith in the future, because that's what gives you the context for enduring a difficult thing. So back to your question, when would be the best time to be alive? Because I think it is easy to see what's going on in the world and be like, I wish I would have lived whenever. Yeah. There's this nostalgia about the past.
It's super romanticized. We've got movies, TV shows, books, and there's nothing wrong with, watching a movie or reading a book, right? I mean, like, man, like there's a really cool element to this, that, and the other, historical fiction, whatever. But when it becomes, and we talk a lot about comparison, right? And when it becomes to the point where I'm comparing and going, man, I wish, because that would have been so much better. That's where it starts to get tricky, right? And I asked this question across different social media platforms because I wanted to see what did people think on the spot. In a workshop, I think people sometimes are afraid to give an answer, right? They don't want to say the wrong thing, but a little bit of anonymity via different social media platforms. We got some answers spanning from a couple thousand years.
So you asked, when would you rather be alive?
Yeah, if you could pick any era in human history, which one would you pick? And just let people say, whatever came to their mind of what they think would be the coolest or the best
time to be alive. So if today isn't the best time to be alive, when is the best time to be alive? What are some of the answers?
You want me to go through chronologically, or like what was most popular? What do you want to
do? Throw it at me.
Okay. So I guess I'll throw out a couple that, the first one, I don't know how people, the first one I'll throw out, I don't know how serious this person was, but one of the answers was, ancient Babylon, which I'm like, okay, And I asked for clarification. They didn't give me any. I suppose, if somebody's like, man, I want to live in like ancient history though. I want to see the pyramids get built. I want to, see the hanging gardens of Babylon, whatever. Like, okay, if that's, somebody thinks that would have been the coolest time to be alive. We can think of some pretty cool elements, perhaps. You're seeing history be made. I can also think of some reasons why maybe that's not such a cool time.
Well, it was especially not cool if you weren't Babylonian.
Fair.
And you were either killed or enslaved, basically. If you lived in the Babylonian Empire and you weren't Babylonian, you were either killed or enslaved. Those were your choices. And you talk about hanging gardens, who might be hanging from those gardens would be a question. And not that they hang people from them, but they did. They would put people on display.
Right.
And this is what happens to people that oppose this regime. So I think you can pretty quickly throw out a huge part of the world's population at that point.
Yeah.
And the life expectancy at that time would have been probably less than 30. And so even if you were Babylonian, you're living real good, you're probably dead pretty soon.
Right.
A huge percentage of people died in childbirth. Kids, but also their mother, So you throw out all that stuff. Just think about all the modern conveniences we take for granted. Like Babylon would have been really warm in the summer. And what a king would have paid for air conditioning.
Right.
Just think about that.
Yeah.
Like, what percentage of their wealth and how many rooms full of gold would they have given for air conditioning? Just have a little bit of respite from that heat. Or maybe even a blister pack of antibiotics. I mean, there was a Babylonian king, I cannot remember his name, that came back from a war victorious. And I think it was Babylonian. It might have been a Roman general. Doesn't matter. But point is the same. He comes back victorious from a battle, and he's got the head of a vanquished foe on his saddle. And as he's riding, this is true. I'm not making this up as I go. I'm pulling this out of the weeds in my head, but it was scraping against the teeth from the skull were scraping against his leg. And he ends up getting an infection and dies miserably weeks later after he goes septic. So he was literally killed by somebody that he had already conquered. So it's just crazy weird. Yeah. But again, just think about a blister pack and antibiotics, $7 would have saved his life.
Yeah.
So I think pretty clearly, like, we don't need to I don't think Babylonia would have been super cool unless you were there visiting for a couple days with some armed guards.
Right. Yeah, I don't think that represents most people's romantic idea of the past. Like, most people, I think, pretty clearly probably wouldn't pick the first, couple thousand years of human existence.
What were some of the more popular ones then?
Yeah. Okay, so I don't think this is one of the most popular answers, but it is a really good example of how we romanticize the past compared to what it actually would have been like. Because somebody said the Renaissance.
Okay.
Like, man, so much incredible art that is, lasted for hundreds, for thousands of years. I would love to see, this art get created and just walk the streets of Paris and all this. And they gave this like beautiful answer. And I'm like, okay, we'll take it. Cool. Like, you put a well thought out answer in there in terms of like the beautiful picture that would be in your eye. But what would that have likely been like to live during the Renaissance?
So, I mean, there are some good points to that. I mean, there's an explosion in art and culture, in education, where the written word was becoming more commonplace and things like that.
Yeah.
Now, the Renaissance started with about 1400. So this was coming right off the heels of the Black Plague, which was mid 1300s, where about half of Europe's population died.
Not a good time.
Not a great time.
Yeah.
On the very heels of that was the 100 Years' War, which was called that because it literally lasted 100 years, from mid 1300s to the mid 1400s. So you're coming off of a time period where roughly half the population died of a horrible disease. And then and they didn't even mask up for it. But anyways, then after that, 100 years of constant battles and wars, which reduced the population even more. So 99%. So if you survived all that, 99% of the world's population was living in abject poverty. And what that means is in adjusted dollars, because the dollar didn't exist back then, less than about $3 a day. That's the standard for today. Now we adjust that backwards for purchasing power. So again, whatever monetary value was used at that time, it would be equivalent to about $3 in today's dollars. And you think about it, so some of what abject poverty means today is that same level of income or purchasing power. But there's also other elements like access to healthcare and clean water and things like that. Well, healthcare wasn't available. In fact, if you were wealthy, the healthcare that you probably had access to was probably more likely to kill you. You had another thought there?
Yeah, this applies to every era for the most part that we're going to talk about. But definitely, I mean, if you're talking, the Middle Ages and this romantic idea of what that might have been like that you might see in a TV show on HBO or whatever. And the idea of poverty, and I realize still to this day, there are people living in poverty in ways that I cannot imagine. And so I'm allowing for, that there's still that type of poverty, but for the vast majority of humans, and I'm going to say for every single person that's listening to this podcast, right? For every single person that is watching this on Instagram or YouTube, for everyone like that, we have no freaking clue what that kind of poverty is like. But I mean, I've been broke. I have been like, oh my gosh, I have no more money, and payday was a couple days ago, and that sucks. I don't know how I'm going to buy dinner. Maybe I've got to use a credit card. I got to, go to mom's house and see if I can get some food there. But it sucks. I was living like a freaking king compared to what it would have been like back then, right?
Yeah.
Because to your point earlier, I mean, in Alaska, we don't really worry about air conditioning, but I had heat. Yeah, I had heat.
You had running water.
I had
electricity.
Car. My car was not fancy and it was kind of busted up, but I had a car. I could put gas in the tank and I could drive 50 miles, all these different things. I wasn't dying.
So abject poverty, again, think of it. In today's dollars, this isn't like, well, $3 would have bought a lot back then. No, this is in today's dollars. So think about how far $3 would go today. Yeah. That's what we're talking about. With no access to any healthcare because it didn't exist, clean water would have been a huge deal too.
Right.
Because, I mean, even the cholera epidemics weren't until after the Renaissance. So we don't even know what the impact was, but you think some of these cholera epidemics would have mostly caused by lack of clean water and infected water systems. Those were like in the 1800s, where again, hundreds of thousands of people died. So it isn't just from a monetary basis. It was all the other things going.
I can flush the toilet and my waste goes away.
Yeah.
It's not in my backyard
your neighbor
or my
drinking
bedroom
later on that day. And thinking about it, John is conscious of what you can buy, but what wasn't even available to buy. So you were literally living your entire life days away from starvation.
Right.
And so just a couple more points before we beat this dead horse a little bit more.
We'll get to horses later too.
So roughly, just looking at the Africa, it's estimated roughly 30% of Africa's population was enslaved during the 1500s to early 1700s. Okay. Now, some of them wasn't just slave trade to like Europe and America. Some of it was enslaved within Africa, but about a third of Africa's population was enslaved during that period. So we're talking about abject poverty for 99%, 99 people out of 100. Now, right now, it's a little less than 10%. So there's still roughly 800 million people living in abject poverty. And to your point, I mean, there are still people who live like this that don't have access to clean water, that don't have access to healthcare or education or anything like that. But it's gone from 99% to about 9 point something percent. But we had a major part of the population of the world back then that wasn't just in abject poverty. They were enslaved. So I don't think any of us would voluntarily live in those conditions. What's another time period?
Yeah. So this next one, I think if we were to just interview like 1,000 people on the street, I think a big chunk of those people would probably say this era. We got a couple responses that said this, but the Victorian era. When I think of, let's call it, turn of the century, Downton Abbey. I don't know how to pronounce that, but the popular TV show. We got all kinds of movies. We've got Sherlock Holmes, maybe not quite that exact era, but around there. And think of the gaslit streets, and we've got ornate buildings.
Is it the Wild West?
The lanterns. Well, so that's something I want to circle back to because I missed its place here, but that's a whole other era I think that we can touch on. But kind of like downtown London or maybe New York or whatever. And we've got photographs, we've got paintings, we've got movies and TV shows of that era. Pretty cool and beautiful, and just the way people talked and everything, and the mannerisms. That is definitely a romanticized period, and there are literally people that if you go on social media, you'll see people talk all the time about they wish they could live in that time period of just, it's so beautiful, and everything was so beautiful back then. How beautiful was it?
Well, you still had sewage in all the major cities literally running down the streets. I think a lot of what we just talked about still fits.
Right.
The cholera epidemics maybe weren't quite as significant, but still worked their way into that period. And during what you're talking about, Victorian era, and that's more, we think, Europe, but what was going on, just look at America during that time. You still had, slavery. So if you're African American during that time, didn't matter if you were living in Europe, we could wipe that off, right? We wouldn't want any part of that period. But even if you weren't, just think of, the French Revolution would have taken place during that time. Horrible time to be alive. Europe was still riddled with wars. We still had, this is a little bit before, but the War of 1812 and some of that was kind of coming up along this. And this was bookended with some still wars with America in the early 1800s, and in the early 1900s you had World War I, kind of at the close of that Victorian era. Yeah. Still no antibiotics, still no real ability to treat disease. They didn't really have any germ theory back then. So even minor injuries could have been life-threatening, and usually were. There was common colds and flu would have killed people back then. Again, it's still like somewhat distant history. Were there any time periods like in more recent history where people?
Yeah. And I'll just say real quickly, we don't need to do it like any sort of a deep dive on it. But yeah, another era that commonly comes up in this is, the American frontier, right? The Wild West, maybe it's Laura Ingalls, right? Little House on the Prairie, that kind of a thing. And it's a different type of romanticized. It's a recognition of, things were tough and it was rugged, but we band together and build a cabin together and live out on the Oregon Trail. And it's like, well, those of us who played Oregon Trail as a kid, we know we're dying of diphtheria. We got to, bury our relatives. Like,
dysentery is a rough way to go.
Yeah. So that one we can pretty easily dispel the notion that that's like this glorious time. And yet, same thing. We've got all the cowboy shows and all the movies, showing what a rugged but beautiful time it would have been. It's like, no, makes for cool movies.
And again, still over 90% of the world would have been in abject poverty at that time. Yeah. So let's jump forward a little bit.
So we've got, one that I don't know if you want to spend hardly any time on. It was a fairly common answer. At least, if you're thinking in terms of America, but the Roaring '20s, right? We got, again, a lot of movies made, a lot of TV shows, a lot of art that romanticizes the Roaring '20s and what a great time to be alive and all this kind of stuff. We all know what was happening around that time and then right after that time. It's, I don't know if you want to spend any time between two world wars and then we've got the Great Depression, coming up right after that.
Well, and you had the Spanish flu in the late 19 teens, 1918, 1919, somewhere in there. that wiped out millions of people worldwide.
Yeah.
And Europe was reeling from World War One. Hitler was just establishing his power, and yeah, you had a few good years in there. Now you can still easily die of polio or pneumonia or measles and all these different things. I mean, pneumonia still takes down older folks, but I mean, a lot of these things have been mostly eradicated, at least in the Western world, and some of those mostly across the globe. And yeah, then you went right into the Great Depression right after that, which obviously had global impact. But Europe was for a large part in shambles during the 1920s. And you know, here in America, there's some good things going on, but in other parts of the world, it was still pretty grim. And then, you know, I think for us growing up, like we grew up watching shows from the 50s and 60s. You know, the Andy Griffith Show and some of the Red Skelton movies and things like that. So we grew up literally watching the same TV that our parents did,
Right.
because we were super cool like that. But I think that's another of those periods where you can kind of extend that. And yeah, there was a lot of prosperity.
Well, that's one I do want to touch on. That's the biggest, I mean, that's the bulk of the answers.
Was it really?
Yeah. And just real quickly, or maybe this is kind of a segue to that, but I mean, you alluded to it earlier, but with all of these answers, you and I are a couple of white guys from Alaska, but anybody that, you know, was pretty much any other ethnicity, like you're probably not picking these eras. I'll just leave it at that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But humans have always we've always had a lot of evil inside of us that we can enact on each other, and we tend to not treat outsiders very well. We tend to just not treat each other very well. Like that's
Humans
pretty darn true. So yeah, there's always going to be evil in the world, far and away. And I saved my answer. Now, I would choose this time for lots of different reasons, but you know, if I had to pick a different time, yeah, I think the 50s and 60s are really cool. I love the music. The cars are awesome. American Graffiti, love that movie. Love the TV shows from the time. Like I love that time period. It's a cool time period in art. And yes, this was far and away the most common answers. One of the responses was, you know, it's such a wholesome time to be alive. You know, values were different. The beauty in the Americana, you know, that we see, you know, the picture of the diner with the, you know, the Chevy Bel Air parked out front, that kind of thing. The waitresses on roller skates, like all of that stuff from that era. There's a lot of beauty in the art from that. And I'll pass it over here in just a second, but you and I were talking about this a few weeks ago, just personally, just texting each other. Cause, you know, we grew up watching some Twilight Zone, and I've just really fallen back in love with it in recent years. And I've been watching it with my boys, and, you know, a common theme in those is the idea of, you know, nuclear war, right? And the fear of nuclear war. And though I obviously didn't grow up in the 50s and 60s, you know, I'm their dad and I know a little bit more than they do. So I'm trying to explain to them, like, well, here's why. Like, this was not science fiction. And it just, even as I was just talking to them, and then you and I were dialoguing about it, but it was just like, it was hitting heavy on my heart. Like, dang, like I cannot even fathom what it would have been like to live in that time where the idea of a nuclear holocaust, that was not science fiction. That was not fantasy. That was not some what if. That was like, I wonder when this will eventually happen.
Well, it almost did several times. And that's where we have the benefit of looking back and knowing what didn't happen.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like watching the end of the movie and then going back to a really scary scene and being like, this isn't scary.
You know they live, and so it's, yeah.
But you've seen the end of the movie. Well, we've seen the end of the movie in some respects.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you talk about, how we romanticize some of those things. And I agree. There's some really cool things about the 1950s. Yeah. If you were American. But let's just stay on that for just a minute. Because our parents remember the bomb drills that they did
under the desk.
Yeah, which I don't think does much with a nuclear bomb, but that's what they did. I think to give people some semblance of you have some control. There's something you can do, which was totally false. If what could have happened did happen, nothing would have mattered.
Yeah.
And and the world was on the precipice of completely self-imploding at that point. And so just look at what did happen.
Right.
Is you did have the Korean War. You did have the Vietnam War. In between that, you had a president assassinated, and in the midst of his presidency, you had the failed invasion in Cuba, the Bay of Pigs,
Right.
which a lot of people thought and very easily could have triggered nuclear responses.
Yeah.
Could have been World War III with nukes. And you had that looming over that entire time period,
Right.
from the 50s up until, really up until the 80s, but it was certainly heightened in the middle of that period, the early 60s. And then we basically fought the USSR via Vietnam. And that started in the late 50s. The French got involved first. And so those things that did happen. If you were living outside of America, Europe was in shambles.
Right.
I mean, the German economy, but not just German economy, Europe was largely in shambles. Now it recovered greatly during this time. But Asia, same thing. You had, the
Post-colonial
the
stuff all over the world.
well, the Japanese economy was absolutely destitute for a big chunk of that. You had horrible civil wars in lots of parts of Asia, not to mention everything the USSR was doing, killing millions and millions of its own people. And just a absolutely catastrophic time period for a lot of people. But even if you were American, just this living in this threat of complete annihilation. And again, it's easy for us to look back and say, well, it didn't happen.
No,
but they didn't know that then.
I mean, we watched actually a really well-made little YouTube video. It was like an 8-minute YouTube video, just going over, obviously not in incredible detail, but going over the Cuban Missile Crisis, and watching that with my boys. I'm like this is. I mean, I know how this movie ends, and this is freaking scary.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's head-pounding scary.
Yeah, and even
how close we came.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think by the grace of God, and who knows how many of these other things that we didn't even know could have happened. It's like, you probably don't even realize some of the car accidents that you avoided because you were, you had to go back inside to grab your keys or something like that. We don't know how many other disasters, but that was at least a very obvious one. And the ripple effects were well into the 70s and 80s. I mean, we had, you had the OPEC crisis in the 70s, where, for those that don't remember, it was this embargo where basically the Middle East quit playing nicely, and they don't do a great job of that now, but they quit playing nicely, and people were waiting in gas lines. So it wasn't just that the cost of gasoline. So you talk about like the cool cars in the 60s. You couldn't drive them in the 70s because you literally couldn't get gas. It wasn't a matter of money. It was people waiting for potentially hours to put a couple gallons in a gas tank, which of course drove costs up immensely. You had crazy inflation. I mean, we had some significant inflation a couple of years ago, but it was nothing like what they experienced in the 70s. You had huge political scandals. I mean, Nixon resigning in the midst of Watergate. Vietnam War was still going on. Still a Cold War looming. I mean, Russia was still ramping, still threatening nuclear war. It wasn't quite as heightened as it was maybe in the 60s. And then even going over into the 80s, where there was a lot of prosperity, again, at least in our country in the 80s. But there's a lot of conflicts that people don't realize, or just forget, because they didn't affect us here in America. Like the Afghan wars, which lasted pretty much the entire 80s, involving Russia, which again, people were worried, like, could this trigger something much greater?
Yeah.
Could this go back to another Vietnam? And you had the Iran-Iraq wars, which also lasted pretty much the entire 80s. And even during this time period, 50+% of the world was again living in abject poverty.
As recently as
the 70s and 80s.
Okay. And so, the other area that we haven't touched on that we did get a lot of votes for is right now. And people listed, various reasons why, but just to quickly rattle a few off, obviously we've got, technological advancements, and we can FaceTime the same way that I can wake up and see all the evil that's happened all around the world. I can call grandma, I can FaceTime with my wife from across the country, or I can, text my buddy, on WhatsApp who's in another country or something. And that's awesome, right? That's cool. We've got medical advancements and all these different things. And we've got an incredible ability for upward mobility that we basically have never had before, on the grand scheme of things. And life is not easy. Life's never going to be easy, but we have an incredible ability to reach out and capture at least some of our goals. In some cases, maybe all of our goals. And it's a pretty cool thing.
No, just even as you're saying, I was thinking back at just my days so far.
Yeah.
To talk about the opportunities we have. I had a conversation with a client in Tennessee earlier today. I had a Zoom meeting with clients up in Fairbanks earlier. I was talking to a buddy in Iowa, and it's just so simple. We don't even think about it.
Yeah.
And this was all, before noon today.
Right.
And it is incredible. And we're getting ready to celebrate Thanksgiving as we're recording this, to unfortunately timestamp this, or fortunately, whatever. But I mean, my wife remembers having Christmas in homeless shelters. And I'm not saying that her life is amazing all the time now, because she is married to me still, but we have an incredibly blessed life. I mean, I remember very vividly watching the meter go up on the gas station at Airport Heights, and as it crossed $20, not sure how I was going to pay for that tank of gas. Literally not sure if I could pay for that tank of gas and still get groceries this week.
Yeah.
That was maybe 15 years ago. And just so much in my life has changed. I got a friend I talked to the other day. They're down in, she's in Arizona now, but she was a refugee from Bosnia. She's not a neurosurgeon, neurologist down in Scottsdale, Arizona right now. They came over fleeing a horrible civil war in the early 90s. And she's a freaking neurologist now.
Yeah.
And her story is, maybe we'll get her on the podcast one of these days, and not to say that today isn't without its issues, but education across the globe. I'm talking about education in America. We have to remember too that we're Americans, and we have given up some freedom. We've given up some things in this country, but worldwide, education is more accessible than ever before. I would say education for even Americans in many ways is more accessible than ever before. You just have to do it yourself.
Right.
YouTube and books, and you can watch lectures from these smartest people at Harvard and Yale and things like that. You just have to go beyond the K through 12 education that you're given and do a little bit of work. But that is now available globally.
Right.
For women's rights, again, worldwide. All-time high.
Right.
Access to clean water. Again, the poverty rate right now is less than 10%, which means there's still close to 1 billion people living in abject poverty. That's horrible, but it's still so much better than it's ever been before. Right. There is so much good. You talk about upward mobility. The people like my wife, who started life with 2 strikes against her to have a very successful life. People like the gal I mentioned. I mean, those are stories that hit very close to home for me, but there's a lot of those. And I think what makes this time period different, though, is talk about this little device, this little phone thing. It also gives us access to all the horrible things that happen across the world. And before, we didn't hear about stuff unless it was worldwide, like it lasted long enough to become the news, because the news was 30 minutes. Like we only got a glimpse of it. Now it's all day long, and it isn't just the bad news that happened on our street or in our neighborhood.
Right.
It's in places we might have never heard of before. So now a human being with access to an iPhone and the internet has to deal with the daily tragedies across the globe.
Right.
That's never happened before. And I think, Logan, it's an awareness. We have an awareness that really we're not built to handle.
Right.
You said this is world an evil place full of horrible people. It always has been. But we just see more is more in our face than ever before. And that is difficult to see how much is going on. But I would encourage people, and we're going to do an episode later on gratitude, because there is so much that we can see that's always gone on. And I would say today is the best time to ever be alive.
Yeah.
I am so grateful to be alive today in this country. Just real quick, I've got me personally. We had a child born prematurely that might not have made it otherwise, and our other kids were born pretty healthy, and maybe 50, 100 years ago they would have made it. But I've been legally blind since I was like 13, and just those little things that we just take for granted every day. So I'm super grateful, but I think there is so much evil that we see that if we don't actively work on focusing all the good things in our life,
right,
that the evil just overshadows.
Right. And that is the beautiful part about it, not to get all squishy and weepy, but evil has always been and always will be. There is tremendous amount of goodness and incredible things that we always have access to now. And we hope that we can be, a small part of that in this podcast, following us on Instagram, talking to us in the office, whatever, to be encouraging and to keep everyone on path. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening to the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. We hope this episode has been inspiring and beneficial to you. If you want help on your journey to financial freedom, reach out to us at veritasalaska.com. We'd love to sit down over a cup of coffee with you, either here in our office or virtually, and get to know you and your needs. And though this podcast is free of charge, we do ask that you please do us two quick favors. If you enjoyed the episode, give our pod a great rating on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you use, and also give us a follow on Instagram. We hope you have a wonderful day filled with gratitude and intentionality. God bless.